Hi guys. So, final kind of notes video, and then there's like the review video to go over. And this one's a short one, but whenever I say that, the video becomes 3 minutes longer, just by merely me saying it's going to be short. So, we're talking about environment. We're going to talk about flora, fauna, and disease. That's kind of the gist of what is probably the easiest things to talk about when we talk about the environment as a septic theme, and that's what we'll be talking about. Okay, so here's a vocab. It's just on one page of vocab. Pause me. That's the result of the cool. Okay. So in terms of the agricultural effects of the exchange networks, one of the most important things, and this is going to be a continuity across our discussion of environment, especially in terms of agriculture, that the plants that humans domesticate in these regions to meet the needs of a population locally end up sometimes being instrumental in the development and growth of the human population. Okay, so I think the most important vegetable or plant that has ever been kind of spread internationally or globally would be the potato, because it's such a hearty starch that, of course, grain probably is consumed more. But where the potato was cultivated, when that's going to happen when Europeans arrive in America and learn where the potato is, and then they can't get enough potatoes. They all love the potatoes, and that leads to like a huge population boom. But potatoes have become instrumental to the population across the planet. That potatoes are. I mean, if you think about where potatoes end up, I would love to talk about this forever because I love talking about this kind of stuff. But like, think of where in all the different restaurants of the world. How many menus have potato on them? And that says a lot about how important that crop is. But the crops we're going to talk about are Chompa Rice, which is a strain of rice that is drought resistant, flood resistant, can be grown 2 times in a year, which means that you can develop double the amount of food within an annual cycle than you could in like normal strains of rice. And what that meant is that there were more calories, which if there were more calories through rice, people felt more secure to have children or could feed children, and children wouldn't starve to death, or the state could then reserve more food. So in times of food insecurity, they could feed the people more. So things like that. And then another important part of this would be that Chompa rice could grow in a more diverse climate and biome, which meant that land that used to be useless in parts of the world became incredibly useful when Chompa rice spread throughout the Indian Ocean and Silk Road network. Bananas are another a good starchy vegetable, I think. not a nutritionist, but has a lot of calories in it. And so bananas spread from Southeast Asia to East Africa, and also allows for population growth in the Bantu-speaking areas and enables those states like Great Zimbabwe to become more stable as well. And so population grows in Africa as a result, right? Cotton, sugar, and citrus, these are all luxury goods. These are goods that are not necessarily necessary to diets, but are like, especially cotton, you're not eating cotton. These become really important for producing other goods like textiles for cotton. Sugar is a good refined good. You usually don't sell sugarcane on its own. You have to put it through a pretty laborious process that is people really want sugar. They like sugar. It does things to your brain. I think we all are aware what sugar does to our brains. And so people really like sugar, become kind of want to always have more of it. So it kind of creates demand for itself. And then citrus is another good that travels from one part of the world to another part of the world. Now, something that is a consequence of this human expansion would be the degradation of the environment. When one of the greatest, it's almost a paradox of a human's relationship with the environment, is when humans are fit for the environment, we eventually strain the system that we fit into to the point that it can no longer sustain us, right? So if we find a way to be successful in a Darwinian sense, in a biological sense, where we can pass on our genes and develop as a population, eventually we put so much strain in the system that we have to find a way to change the system and adapt the system to continue our own success. whether you feel that's like a good thing about humans or just a thing that humans do or a bad thing, it doesn't really matter. It's what we do. So examples of this would be like overgrazing, right? So if you're going to rear cattle and raise cattle or sheep or any other kind of like animal that pastoralists would use, these animals need grass. You eat a lot of it actually throughout the day. Cattle eat grass all day, which means you have to move cattle. And eventually, if you have too many cattle, you're eating more grass than what's growing. And that leads to an incapacity for an economic system that uses cattle to support itself to continue to perpetuate itself. So eventually, if you have too many cattle and no one's telling you to stop rearing cattle, and cattle are really economically productive to meet human interests, you end up making it impossible to use cattle to sustain your economic interest in the long term. In Europe, the more the population grew, the more demand for land grew, as well as the need for the goods produced by forests. Most deforestation isn't about like using the wood. I mean, that's obviously a bonus for human interests, but also forest land can often be really good for farmland, and it's usually arable land. So if deforestation occurs not necessarily for like because of demand for wood, like skyrocketing, but also it's demand for wood, but also it's demand for land to be worked to produce food to feed a growing population. And because of that, trees are really good for the soil. And the reason why the land was good to grow things in was because the trees have been doing this for billions of years. I want to say hundreds of millions of years. I don't know how old exactly the first tree is. But trees are really important. And the planet's soil and environment keeps trees into account in balancing the nutrients in the soil. When those trees are absent from an environmental system, the thing that was helping the soil be productive for growth stops being productive, so soil erodes. And then the little ice age, the thing we talked about a little bit, it's a global lower average in the average temperature annually for about a 200, 300 year period. And that's going to lead to more crop failures, right? It's not just because every day is 1 degree colder. It's because there are days where the planet is way colder than it needs to be normally, which means a crop can fail kind of when it should not have failed. So that's agriculture. Next, we have disease. And the big one would be the bubonic plague. But literally, if one disease was one place, it would spread to another place. It's just the bubonic plague is the best example. So the Mongol conquest of Europe is what connects Eurasia, and then connects Eurasia, so people are moving more as a consequence of Mongol conquest. But then you also have Mongols and their siege tactics, right? Sending plagued bodies in cities to like accelerate the pace of the siege. But also war creates refugees, so people flee regions. But people who are refugees probably are pretty malnourished. When you're malnourished, you are probably more susceptible to diseases. When you're more susceptible to diseases, you're going to get those diseases, and then you're going to spread those diseases to people who are around you, maybe people who are not refugees in this context. The bubonic plague is the best example of this. It hits Europe the hardest. There's a few reasons why, but it could be European sanitation norms. It could be the density of Europe's population in cities. It had kind of reached its peak urbanization. Europe does not urbanize to the same extent till the 1700s. So many people live in cities and they die. But so many people die as well that there's a scarcity of people to do work, which means that workers have more leverage. They can negotiate for better wages. But as more people are born, that scarcity of labor is resolved, which means wages go down in pace with inflation. So it's a very temporary gain, but often it's kind of interesting. And this happens anytime. Lots of people die in a place, is that there's a scarcity of labor, which gives laborers more leverage, and so on and so forth. So that is our chapter. That's our final chapter to take notes on. But we also have one more review chapter to discuss.